Okay, good morning. Um, I think that I want to be a little less formal this morning because I want to try to make this session as useful to you as possible. So I want to start by understanding um, what will be helpful to those of you who are sitting here in the room. Um, so Dr. Satish and I are faculty members in biomedical engineering at Case Western Reserve University. Um, as you know, the training program that's supporting this short course is providing opportunities for master's and PhD level training in biomedical engineering. But I also know that not all of you are biomedical engineers, and I want to understand what are um, what are your plans? So show me how many of you um, have an engineering undergraduate degree, your bachelor's degree. Okay, so most of you, some of you, what are the others? Those of you who didn't put up your hand, just call out, what are your undergraduate degrees? Okay, who else is not biomedical engineering? Okay, anybody else? Chemistry? I'm sorry, software engineering? Okay. Um, okay, second question. How many of you are finished with a master's degree? Anybody? How many of you are in the process of master's degree, currently master's students? Up high. Okay. So most of you are currently master's students. Okay, and last question. How many of you are um, how many of you are planning to or would like to plan to study for PhD? Several of you? Okay. So I think that's what this session is mostly going to focus on is how do how does one prepare for studying for PhD? Okay. Now, my expertise is PhD programs in the US. As you know, there are PhD programs all around the world, and they're not all the same. So, so we're going to teach you about how PhD programs in the US operate. And our example, of course, is Case Western Reserve uh, a research university in the US. Um, so where do I want to start? Um, let me start by introducing you to our program at Case Western Reserve University. I'll do that just by starting at our website. Now, if you if you are on your laptop, feel free to follow along. Just browse to case.edu/BME, biomedical engineering. This is our website. And it has a lot of information. And these days, it's, a website is going to be your main source of information for any PhD program at any university. You know this already. That being said, it's not the only source of information. And often often it's hard to sort out. I'll point to some examples as I go. Often you do want to reach out to somebody personally to to get clarity. So here's the website. Different websites for different universities and different departments are all going to be organized differently, but this is an example. This is ours. So you can learn about the department as a whole in a few different ways. In this case, you could browse directly to primary faculty. If you're applying for graduate programs, there's basically two important pieces of information that you need. You need to know about the application process, deadlines, requirements. How many of you know what is required to apply for a PhD program in the US? What kind of documentation, what kind of preparation? Any ideas? What do you think you need? Yeah. A concept? I understand why you're saying that, but that's actually, you don't need that. You don't need a research proposal. Okay. You need your transcripts. Okay. You need letters of recommendation. You need a personal statement. Okay. In other words, an essay that you've written about yourself, why you want to study to be a researcher, what your interests are. And in that personal statement, you need to describe your experience, and you also need to describe your interests, including which faculty members in the department that you are applying to you are particularly interested in interviewing with or matching with. Okay, so this is something to understand. You've all your master's program here at Makerere required that you define your own research project. Of course, you need to get it approved and you needed to find supervisors. But if you're studying in a PhD program in the US, you're going to join the research group of a principal investigator, a faculty member, like me, like Dr. Satish, like many others. Okay. And the research assistants in our labs are going to be graduate students or postdoctoral researchers. And the projects they're going to be working on are the projects that we have grant funding for. Okay, so that's actually an important piece of information. If you study for a PhD, you're not paying for it, right? You're going to be hired as a research assistant, and that's the research that you're going to be working on. You're going to be responsible for carrying out the work that meets the objectives of the research grant that's funding you. So that's why you want to find a group that matches your interests, right? Because joining a group, there's a lot of variability, and in some cases you have enough, time to follow interests, find projects that you initiate. And if you're ambitious and if you work hard, you'll definitely have time to work on projects that you initiate. But at the same time, you're going to be working in the environment of the large projects that your PI has initiated. And that's the environment, that's the training that you'll be getting. Okay, I'm rambling a little bit. So you can go to the academics tab, graduate, and here you're going to find the information on the PhD program and how to apply for it. Some description of the requirements. This is something to bear in mind as well. In the US, a PhD program has course requirements, and they're not insignificant. Okay, this is a lot. So, in general, it's not required to have a master's degree to enter a PhD program. However, coming as an international student, it's I'm gonna tell you it's required. It's not actually required, but coming as an international student, um, it's effectively required. It's going to be very difficult to match with a PI as an international student if you don't have a master's degree. So consider for your, it's not a problem for you. You're all master's students. Okay, but just so you're not confused, it's not officially a requirement, but it is practically a requirement. Does that make sense? Okay. So that being said, this 36 credit hours of course requirement, um, half of that, depending upon the the master's degree, the courses that you took as a master's student, these can be applied to this. So sometimes at least half of this coursework is already completed if you've come with a master's degree. It depends on the program. Okay, so did I miss anything, Dr. Satish? Transcripts, personal statement, letters of recommendation, anything else essential for an application? CV, right, okay. Prepare a good CV. And letters of recommendation, it's usually 3. And the best, ideally, they're related to your research experience. Okay, your academic experience is very important, but nothing is more important than your research experience. So letters of recommendation are best if they come from investigators, faculty members whom you work with. The best recommendations come from people who know you very well. Do you have any questions about these application requirements? Yeah. That's a good question. The question is if your master's coursework does not cover the core material for the degree for the PhD program that you're entering, is there provision to study on the side? That wouldn't be part of the PhD program. That would be your initiative to prepare yourself to be qualified for the program that you want to enter. You are one of the few that don't have an engineering degree. So it's very challenging. Dr. Satish and I have had conversations about this. It's very challenging for a candidate without an engineering undergraduate degree to be accepted and succeed in an engineering PhD program, largely because of the required coursework. There's just foundational material that is difficult to make up, right? All of the math and the physics and the chemistry and the basic engineering, the signal processing, the modeling, the mechanics, all of these things that an undergraduate engineering degree gives you a background for. It's difficult to make up for that. That being said, biomedical engineering is not the only PhD program that can lead you towards biomedical technology, careers. Okay, in particular, data science and artificial intelligence, machine learning, these are not all engineering degrees. These aren't necessarily engineering programs. Maybe.
Yeah. So the as far as the coursework goes, so the catch is that a lot of these assume a certain amount of math, calculus, signals background, which if you've not done an engineering degree, you may not have done that kind of coursework. One option is, of course, take time out and do those courses. I've had some students who have taken basically an extra year and taken some of that coursework and then joined the program. But it is still challenging for them, even though they've done that, just because they've not learned it over the course of 3 years. They've learned it in the span of 9 months. So it's kind of a crash course. So be aware that it is challenging to do it. Andrew and I have been discussing, some options for students like that. What is the best way to make sure that they'll be able to do well in the program? But like Andrew said, it's not just about engineering. There is it's a I want to say it's a biomedical informatics PhD program is there at Case as well, which is not engineering heavy. It is actually a little bit more wide ranging, but they do have an AI and data science focus in there. So that might be an option. Andrew and I need to probably reach out to that program to figure out how best to integrate with them. But I have had students from that program do kind of a rotation or like a 3 or 4 month stint in my group, just to get a sense of what the group is like and what kind of research we do. So there are other options in terms of what you can do, even if you don't have the engineering degree, but are really interested in getting into data science, AI, biostatistics, etc. Which you can do, and they would have different requirements in terms of their coursework. Their coursework is not so engineering heavy; it's a little bit more application and basic science focus. So it might be easier for someone to manage the core courses in that case. The way most of the graduate programs at Case work is that if you already have a master's degree and you have at least a minimum grade in that degree, I think you have to have at least a B or better. They will let you count those courses toward your PhD. So what that means is that to complete a PhD at Case, and in most US universities, the same system, you have to finish like 36 credits worth of coursework and 36 credits worth of research. But the 36 credits worth of coursework could easily be kind of substituted with graduate coursework that you've taken as part of a master's degree. So as long as you have, like I said, as long as you meet the criteria in terms of your grade, you basically get to remove some of the coursework from your plate. You almost always have to do the core courses that you have listed here because they are core. They're kind of the foundational courses for that program. But then you have electives, and those electives you can remove them saying, I already finished them as part of my master's degree. So it's a way to speed up your time to graduation. It's also a way to spend more time on your research and get one more paper out. But it's a way to kind of make it easier, especially for someone who's coming in with a master's degree. It is not as though you have to spend 1 or 2 years getting a master's, and then if you come to the US and spend another few years doing more courses. You can essentially say, well, I took those courses there, I'm using them here, so I get to spend more time doing research. And a lot of students have done that. It helps them. It's faster for them to get to graduation, easier for them to do the research. What you are usually unable to substitute is core courses. You almost always have to do core courses unless you've already done a particular course, in which case there is a way for you to test out of that course. But then it usually means you have to substitute it with a different kind of course, right? Because every department at Case and most universities requires you to do a certain number of courses at the university as part of your PhD.
Thank you. Any other questions so far? English proficiency testing is the question. Is it a requirement? That varies. You all are studying, well, maybe you're not all. Most of you are studying at Makerere. All of you are probably studying at institutions where English is the primary language of instruction. Is that correct? English at all the universities in Uganda is the language of instruction. That's correct? Okay. So officially, I think it's not a requirement to have proficiency testing if your undergraduate and master's degrees were awarded from universities where English is the primary language of instruction. That being said, I still see so many students, submitting TOEFL and the other test.
Because it kind of, that is so CASE, I think, has made it optional at graduate studies, but you should confirm it on the website. These policies are a little bit, up in the air. Always confirm everything we're saying, confirm with the graduate studies website, and something is confusing, you can reach out to us and we'll explain it. But CASE, I think, has made it optional, and they say optional but recommended, something along those lines, which does not mean you have to do it, but they're saying if you submit it, it's okay, essentially, right? But other universities, some of them still do require English proficiency testing. The English proficiency test is not super complex. It is essentially to confirm that you are able to understand and respond in regular American or English. So it's not super complex. The only thing I will say is that an assumption that everyone is going to make, regardless of whether you take the English proficiency test or not, and I'm saying this as an international student, it took me some time to understand this about the American system, is whatever your primary language of instruction was in whatever country you're coming from, when you come to the US, they expect you to go quiz them if you have any question at all. They assume that you know English, you understand everything I said, and if you did not understand something, you're going to come and ask. So more than English proficiency testing, to me, it is important to get it in the mindset of I am going to go and bug people with questions if I have them. If you don't have them, you're going to get all sorts of other things. So it's not directly connected to the question of English proficiency. But the reason it's connected is because if you feel that sometimes Andrew and I are saying things and you're not quite sure what we mean, this is where the English proficiency test is intended to be a surrogate, that you understand everything we're saying and you're assimilating it and you're able to make use of it. So more than doing the test, be comfortable with this concept of they're saying things to us, we're going to understand them, we're going to action them, and it's fine. And if you feel uncomfortable with any of that, it is worth taking the time to make sure that your English skills are reasonable enough to be able to do it. And this has got nothing to do with people from Uganda or any country. It is just outside the US, it's not always that philosophy. And I've had friends from India who struggled with that because they were good at came to the US because of the nature in which the communication happened, they all struggled. And they actually went out and took English proficiency classes so that they would not struggle in the class because of the style of the way English and communication happens. So not quite directly answering your question, but it's just my own feedback and philosophy to everyone here is be aware of that. There is an expectation of how conversant and how comfortable you're going to be with English. No reflection on your ability, but expectation. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah. I'll just add a couple of things to emphasize what Dr. Satish was saying. It's actually very common among students, honestly, even among native English speakers, first language speakers, common among students to be uncomfortable showing uncertainty or showing some lack of knowledge. Students are often feeling uncomfortable to show a professor or a PI that they don't know something. So when they're lectured to, the instinct is to say yes, yes, yes. Whereas you want to develop the instinct to listen carefully and identify what's not clear and ask. Maybe in the moment, maybe later, but it's actually a sign of strength to identify when you don't understand something, right? I mean, I'm old, and it's one of my strengths to be very willing to admit when I don't know something. Now I'm old, so I don't get judged, right? If you're teaching me something and I don't know it and I ask you questions, I don't think you're looking down on me, and I don't feel uncomfortable because I'm old. In the other reverse way, you may feel uncomfortable because you don't want to show weakness to me because there's a power imbalance, right? But that's something that you should get used to. As Dr. Satish is saying, it's not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength when you can ask questions to get clarity. As far as English proficiency, one other thing, I hire students, including international students, regularly, and I still don't understand what a TOEFL score means. What is a good score? What is a bad score? Much more important is to see a writing sample and to have a personal interview. Then I really know, what is the level of English proficiency, and writing and speaking are both important.
So yeah, so I even when I'm reviewing applications and I do admissions for the department, I direct them. I don't really pay a ton of attention to whether the TOEFL score is great or something. If the TOEFL score is really low, I'm gonna kind of flag it and tell the faculty member, whoever is interested in the student, okay, look, just so you're aware, this score is not great. You might want to, as part of your interview, try to understand how well they are able to speak or understand what you're saying. So it's not like a rejection criteria, but it's more of like, okay, there's something here that we should make sure they're not going to struggle, right? Um, that's the way we use, if at all, because none of us really understand what does it mean to be, like 95% on the TOEFL versus 90%. Like, is there a difference? I'm not sure. But if that person has a 50% on the TOEFL, and let's say the bar is, I think, 70 or whatever, then I'm going to say, well, they're well below the bar. What happened? Like, did they just not eat well before going to the test and they just kind of blanked out, they didn't pay attention, or is it they genuinely did not understand what was going on? One other thing I will say, just to add on to what Andrew said about questions and asking them. So most of you here were here during the session on Tuesday that I conducted with the live demo and the Jupyter notebook, right? I'm guessing most of you here believe that I understood everything that happens in that notebook, right? On Sunday, I actually emailed the person who created that notebook with my questions because I didn't know some things that were going on in the notebook. I don't know what this command is supposed to be doing. Why do you do it this way? Right? So I then came and led the session and I guided you all through the notebook, right? But me, the instructor, 2 days before the session, still had questions. And if I took the philosophy that, well, I'm already supposed to know this stuff, I would not have asked those questions. But that is kind of the important piece here. If you don't ask the questions, it is very hard for other people to help you. If you ask questions, you will always get help, right? Because now once you have a question, like, oh, they didn't understand this. Okay, I need to explain this better, right? But if you don't ask the question, everyone's going to assume you know everything. You understood everything that was said to you, and you're going to take care of it. And again, speaking as someone who was an international student when they started in the US, this was something that I realized in the first week, that I had to be okay, no matter who it was, to be like, I didn't understand a word of what you said. Please say it again. Please tell me what you said again so I understand it. And that saved me so many times, I cannot even stress it. And I learned it the hard way. I learned it the hard way because my advisor said, hey, you need to run this. And I was like, okay. And I went back to my table. I did something completely wrong, fundamentally wrong. And then I went back to him and I showed him the result. And he's like, that's not what I asked you to do at all. I asked you to read the data like this. And I'm like, what does that mean? He's like, yeah, why didn't you ask me this question 3 days ago? We could have saved 3 days of you doing the wrong thing. And then like you could have saved a lot of time. That's the reason. And so that's when I learned, okay, you got to do stuff. If you want to do stuff right, you got to ask questions.
Okay. Yes. I'm going to ask a question. What is CGP? Your grade average? Okay, all right. See, I can ask questions too. We call it GPA, grade point average. CGP, what does it stand for? Cumulative. Oh, okay, okay. Okay. Um, there's not a strict requirement, but having a better average, of course, is better. When I advise students who are applying for graduate programs, I generally, it also depends on the system you're coming from, because to be honest, the same grade average in one school system doesn't mean the same thing as another system. In the US, for example, we have very high grades these days. Grades have been inflated at an undergraduate level pretty high. So I would tell a US undergraduate, your GPA really needs to be better than 3.5 out of 4 in order to not be cut off. And even better is better. But some universities are not inflating grades like that. And so an average of 3 is still very good and a high, in a high percentile of the class. But Dr. Satish is the one who actually screens these, so you should answer.
So for international students, we don't go just off the GPA that they provide, because sometimes it's not out of 4. We also don't necessarily go purely off the converted GPA, because I think I don't remember if the case system does it automatically or students do it, but sometimes they will say, some students have a GPA that's out of 10, but the US system is out of 4. And there's some conversion that is done to convert the score out of 10 to a score out of 4, right? But the problem is that 10 gives you a lot more gradation, whereas 4 gives you a lot less. So something that is decent on a scale of 10 may look below average on a scale of 4. So we actually look at both. So when we look at, especially international students, we look at both their actual GPA and their CGPA. And we will, this bar of about it. So I usually, for international, I take the students who are below a 3 out of 4 after conversion, right? Those are the students I will basically go and look at their grades a little bit to see if they got a lot of very low grades in their classes. Not because it's a reflection of their research, but it's a reflection of how well they're going to do in the coursework. Because at the end of the day, if you want to get a graduate degree in the US, you need to have at least a 3 or a 3.5, which is a B or better in all your courses to even graduate. This is not in order to get your degree, you cannot have a C in graduate school. Or I think you can have 1 C or something, right? So to me, it's not a question. What's that? That's nice. Right. So, but the problem is that if a student comes in and a lot of their grades are very low, then that could mean they might struggle with the coursework. So it's more, again, just like the TOEFL I use for international students, I use it as a flag to be like, okay, like be aware the student could have issues with the coursework. But this is where the rest of your profile comes into play. If you've been your master's degree, the project you did is really solid, you're able to talk about it well, explain it well, you clearly have the technical background you gain from it, then that suggests that you're going to do really well in the more important part of your PhD, which is the research. In which case, we would probably come up with some kind of plan by which you will do well on your coursework, because there are strategies to kind of make sure you won't have a bad outcome there. But there are no strategies to really help you have a great outcome in research. If you're coming in without the skill set, it's kind of very hard to make all of it happen in one shot, right? Like we can, ideally you want candidates who have a decent academic background and a decent research background, so you can elevate it. Or you can have a candidate who has a very good academic background and a lower research background, or the other way around. And you can elevate one, right? But if both of these are low, now it's a real challenge for the student. Even the advisor can spend time and happen, but for student, it's just a lot more work to get everything up at once. So, but I've seen students who came in who had really bad grades when they came in, and they, went hammer and tongs, spent all their time and effort. They came out with amazing, multiple papers during their PhD and had a decent grade point at the end of it and everything. It all worked out. It took a lot. I know how much work they put in for that. Not that people can't put it in, but I know it took a lot more work for them relative to some of the other students that I saw.
Yes. Okay, so the duration and is it full time? Yes, if you're a PhD student in the US, you are full time. I can't think of an exception to that. Well, I had one student who was you I don't know if this was before your time. I had one student who studied his PhD, and partway through um he he wanted to work in industry, and he had an opportunity to join a great company, and so he did. He took a job and wanted to continue his PhD, but it was then part-time. It took him 12 years before he was finished. It is not recommended. So absolutely, you will be full-time student if you're in a PhD program. The duration, the objective is 4.5 to 5 years duration. Some students take longer. It's unusual to be 4 years would be ideal. That's actually a little bit unusual. Shorter than 4 years is very, very unusual. It depends very much on the nature of your research, right? So, for example, some research depends upon maybe the most extreme example in our department are entire programs. This is in neural engineering, entire programs that rely on, one or two human patients. Why? Because they are severely disabled. They're quadriplegic, and they have agreed to have implants in their brain. And so this is a very unusual, very rare patient, and there can be 6 graduate students writing their dissertations doing research on one patient, and it can take a long time. Now, in Dr. Satish's lab, there's no waiting for the one rare patient, right? And so it's very, very different situations depending on the nature of the research. Anyway, I said too much. I think we answered the question on duration and full-time. Any more questions before we move on?
So, yeah, I'll just add to that is everything Andrew said is accurate. Usually the question comes down to if you spend a little bit if you spend a little bit extra time, are you able to get a lot more done? And that's usually the decision the students make. So I've had students who wanted to get done in 4 years, and they came to me at the point at about 3 years and some change in, and they were like, hey, I want to spend an extra year or an extra 6 months because I have this one project that I can finish. They did that. They finished the thing and they got done, right? So they took 4.5 years. I had another student who took 5 years, and it all just came down to if they got really engaged, they're like, oh, I want to get this really high impact thing done, and they did it. So that's it. It's a time to graduation is a dialogue between you and your advisor.
In your committee.
And your committee.
Yes. You can speak it out, and I'll repeat your question.
Yeah.
It's never going to be 12. It's because you're going to be full-time. It's not going to be 12. You'll be kicked out if it's too long.
Around the 6-year mark, the department starts to really crack down and be like, okay, we need to move you towards
Yeah,
graduation.
it's not good for the student and it's not good for the department when a student takes more than 6 years is already getting long. It makes our statistics bad. And it makes it you have to explain yourself to your next employer. You know, you apply for a postdoc or a faculty position, somebody's going to ask you, why 6 years? Why were you so slow? Right? Okay. So go on. That's a real challenge. But I forgot your first question already. The undergraduate transcript. Your undergraduate transcript is very important because that's how you're screened to enter the program in the first place.
Unless you're asking because you already have a master's, so therefore undergraduate, is that why? So for international students, it's much harder to judge universities because you really need to be like, so we know Makerere University in Uganda, but if somebody's from a different university in Uganda, unless I reached out to Robert and Andrew and they know about it, it's very hard for me as in the admissions committee to know exactly how good or bad a university is. I do reach out. I do reach out to faculty from those countries or who have background to say, hey, have you heard of this? Does this sound reasonable? The transcript, like I said, and the admissions committee level, we use grades as a way to see if there are potential issues. So if a student has a lot of very low grades, it could mean they'll struggle academically. That's it. It is, to me, grades have no meaning from a research perspective, right? I had students who joined the lab with perfect 4.0 GPAs out of 4, like 4 out of 4, 100%, and they could not do research. They did not understand how to get into the research. So academics has no connection to the research, in my book.
Little connection.
In my book, I have my own philosophy. But to me, it's about like areas of concern. Is this person going to struggle in academics? We need to know that going in so that we can make sure they don't struggle. That's it. And then your question about family.
If you have a master's degree, then that is more important than your bachelor's degree. And I could extend that going forward. After you're awarded your PhD, nobody will ever ask you about your grades again. Not even your PhD grades. It's only about the research. Anybody that's going to hire you doesn't care about your grades, only about your research. So grades only matter for a little while, for just to get you to the next stage. Okay, about family. That's difficult. So I'm trying to think of two ways to answer. My own experience, I started my family while I was still in my PhD program. I graduated, I had 2 children by the time I got my PhD. I was not an international student, so there wasn't a question of, do I try to bring my family or do I go by myself and leave my family behind? International students that I know have made both of those choices. And I don't know how, I don't think I can give you the advice. I think maybe there are Ugandans who have done it both ways, even those who have studied at Case. There are many graduates of Case Western Reserve University, Ugandans who are here, who you can consult with. We've been training Ugandans for 30 years, not in biomedical engineering, but in biomedical science and in medical school. I would find it very difficult to live remotely from my family for 4 or 5 years, you know, visiting once or twice a year. I would find that a challenge. That's a choice that some people make and it works for them. And I may not know about how much of a struggle that was. Others will bring their families. Trying to remember, I think I was just talking to a recent graduate the other day, one of Dr. Bohm's students. Is it Ivan?
Ivan.
He had his family with him in the US while he was studying, but they always intended to return. So he was talking about how he and his wife had to think about how they were raising their children in the US so that they were prepared to return, as opposed to raising their children for a few years in the US intending to stay, right? It's a very different culture, right? So are the children going to be Americans? Are they going to be Ugandans? Are they going to be both? I can't navigate that for you. It's a very good question, but I would talk to other Ugandans who have done it. That's my advice. Find people who have done it and ask them their experience.
I agree. Like, it's very talking to people from your own background who've gone through this process, especially given the very strong cohorts that we've had trained at Case, I think would give you kind of their personal experience, which I think is the most critical piece here. The only thing I will say from the family perspective is, you, as someone with a family, you need to be aware of your kind of what your expectation is as a PhD student. And that varies from field to field, right? So if you're doing preclinical research with animals, it's very different than if you're doing computational research with AI, very different from doing the patient type research where you're observing this patient. What you're expected to be doing at what hour of the day, to what and what day of the week hugely varies. So I have friends in the US who are settled in the US. They have families, you know, their kids are in school and so on, and they have to go in on a Saturday evening because they work with mice. Guess what? If the mouse experiment requires you to be there on a Saturday to get it out and move it to the next stage or give it the drug or whatever it is, you have to kind of manage everything else. Because if that's the timing of the experiment, everything else has to be subservient to this. And these are not necessarily, some of these are PhD students, some of these are more senior postdocs and scientists, but they're all kind of, that expectation is kind of built into that, right? So that is the part to be aware of, is that depending on the kind of field you're in, there are expectations of how some of the work is going to get done. And that means you have to manage your personal and family life around that. And personal life is easier. It's just you or just you and one other person. But as the number of people involved increases, that expectation is, it takes more management. So that, I think, is something to be aware of. It's something I, as a faculty member, it's something I have to work with my family as well. Guess what? The deadline, the grant has to go in on Monday. I have to spend Sunday working on it. I'm good. I have to spend Sunday working on it, and my wife has made her peace with it. And then I have to make up for it by making sure I don't do it every Sunday, because then I'd get into trouble. But these are
work-life balance.
These are the things that you have to work out. So.
I know there are more questions, but let me show you another thing, because we're going to run out of time in 10 minutes, and I want to help you navigate, and then we'll take the rest of the time, and tea break, we can keep answering questions. But when you're applying for a PhD program, there are a few things to bear in mind. First, you have to submit your application, right? We talked about all the requirements for the application. We talked a bit about well, we didn't talk enough about this. It's not it's about being admitted to a program. It's also about matching with a lab, matching with a PI, matching with a project. And it's also about succeeding in the program. I'm not sure which is the right order to talk about those things. The succeeding in the program, I'm referring to what Dr. Satish was talking about. You can be admitted to the program and still really struggle with the course requirements. And if you can't manage the course requirements, you're going to fail in the program. And nobody wants that outcome. The program doesn't want the outcome. Your PI doesn't want that outcome. You certainly don't want that outcome. So being admitted and being prepared to succeed in the coursework and in the research, those aren't the same thing. You know, when we admit students, we want to have as much confidence as possible that they're prepared to succeed. That's the whole reason for screening students, right? That they'll succeed. But of course, there's no certainty. So you need to be paying attention to it as well, right? Not only can I be admitted, but when I'm admitted, will I succeed? Am I prepared to succeed? And do I need to do any more preparatory work in order to be ready to succeed? But then there's the matching with a PI. Okay, there's a little bit of variance in the US system. Okay. Some universities will admit a cohort into the first year where they'll rotate and find a lab match. Some programs at Case do that. It varies by program, it varies by university. Okay, that's one way. You're admitted to a program, and then during the first year, you try to find a lab. Okay, that's not how our program works in biomedical engineering at Case. We don't admit a student unless they are already matched with a lab. Sometimes there's small exceptions. Maybe a small group of investigators will agree to admit a student that will rotate with them and match with one of them. That's unusual. Usually you're admitted when you match with a PI. So Dr. Satish and his committee will screen the applicants. I need a student, so I'm going to take the list that Dr. Satish gives me. I'm going to look for those that seem qualified, seem to be a good match to my research program. The students themselves are going to indicate their interests and the investigators that they think are a good match. And we're going to have interviews, and I'm going to make an offer to somebody. So you need to be the student that I want to make an offer to, right? I'm saying myself, every PI is going to make offers to individual students. So only after they've been screened and matched with a PI are they going to be admitted. When they're admitted to a research program, so there's funding and there's a project. And then it's just about succeeding in doing the work. But how are you going to find the investigator that you want to interview with, that you want to get their attention? This means you have to do some research, okay? And the first way to do that is what I'm pointing at here. You can go to the list of primary faculty, research faculty, associated faculty. You can also go here to research general categories. Okay, I'm going to skip to imaging only because that's where both of us live, but there are many other categories. Maybe you're a better match for immunoengineering or biomechanics or AI, biomaterials. Okay, but let's go here. Dr. Satish is in AI and in imaging. So here's the imaging.
Faculty will not, that list is not
Exclusive.
It's not exclusive. So I work in biomedical imaging as well as AI. So you will find my name in both sections, right? So yeah, anyway, I'll let Dr. Rollins continue.
So here's some general categories. This is a flawed. Some of these are large centers. Some of these are individual PIs, laboratories. every PI has a web page. Dr. Satish has a very good one. I have a bad one. But we all have a web page. Mine is bad because it's not up to date, and I'm old, and so old faculty don't keep their web pages up to date. But
But
you can
but a great way to find out what a faculty member is doing is everyone here know what Google Scholar is? Yeah, so go to Google Scholar, type in the faculty member's name, right? Most of them have a profile on Google Scholar, right? But by default, Google Scholar ranks it by the number of citations. But there's a button you can click to rank it by the year. Because number of citations could be, very old papers from 10 years ago must be having the most citations.
well, yeah,
But
always.
you want to know what they're doing today. So sorted by year, 2024 onwards, and then look for the papers. And that will give you a sense of what they're working on right now.
Yep. So you can
That
go to
is
their
also a
website.
great way when you write to the faculty member to reveal that you spent the time to look at what they're doing right now. Because when somebody emails me and they talk about a paper I published 10 years ago, most of the time I just hit delete because it means they're talking about something I'm not working on anymore. But if you took the time to see what I'm working on right now, I'm interested.
Look, we're next to each other on the website. It's alphabetical. Yes, thank you. Do that. This is all the information you have usually. I'd like to encourage you to apply to any program you can. We come from Case Western Reserve University. We have a deliberate program to try to build capacity here in Uganda. So the difference for us is that we can guide you through a next step. This is a long list of faculty members, okay? But what you don't know is, well, is Dr. Yu recruiting this year? Is Dr. Wilson retired already? Does Dr. Satish have grant funding right now? Right, you don't know all these things. There's a list of 30 faculty here, but only 5 or 10 of them are recruiting this year. Right, so if you express an interest in 5 faculty members and none of them are recruiting, you're going to end up not getting any interviews, and you're not going to find a match. So of the PhD students in BME at Case, most of them, all but one, I've made the matches, right? I've talked to the faculty members, asked them to look at this candidate, they've interviewed, they've made a match. Okay, so it's a little bit challenging for, an American professor who doesn't know anything about any university in Africa, much less Uganda, to consider an African student when he has a list of 50 American students. He knows their universities. He knows the professors they worked with, right? So that you have a barrier already. So we're trying to make these matches for you. Now, it's not the only way. You can get accepted yourself if you can get their attention, right? So I'd encourage you to apply to any university, any program that you want to. If you're going to apply to BME at Case or to any program at Case, then we're going to try to help you make a match with faculty who have funding, who have an opening, who have a research match with your interests. Does that make sense?
Which means you should be emailing Dr. Rollins if you want to apply to Case. Don't just apply to Case and assume that somehow the system will figure out, or Dr. Rollins will figure out that you've applied. Make sure to email him in advance so that he's aware, so that he can make sure to guide you towards the right folks in the right direction. At any other university, I'm going to give you, there are 2 options. One is just like Dr. Rollins is showing you here, you can go to the faculty webpage and find the faculty and then go to Google Scholar and so on. You can email those faculty members. Usually their contact information is there. You can email them But don't just email them and say, hey, do you have a position open, right? Tell them a little bit about yourself. I'm so and so. I'm at this university. I have done this kind of research. Your work seems to be really well aligned. I was wondering if you have positions. I'm not saying they will respond. I get 10 such emails a day. I don't respond to most of them. Some of them I do. If it's something that I can see alignment with and so on, I will respond to them. If it's some random, completely out of unrelated field, I don't respond because like too many emails to respond to. Right? Not rude, just don't have the bandwidth to respond to everything. So try to target it to the people who are most aligned with your background. That's one option. The other option is, again, you can reach out to Andrew, you can reach out to me as well. My contact information is there. You're interested in a particular area, you're interested in case, you're interested in other universities, we can try to help you make connections where possible. Again, no promises that it'll actually work out, that we email someone and they say, yes, I'm absolutely willing to hire them, but we can help. And as much as we're able to help, we'll help. But the rest of it really comes down to your application and the alignment and the match. If that is made, you will get into this, you will get admitted. If that connection is not easy to make, obviously harder to get admitted.
You know, networking, right? You're familiar with that. Um, this is really what we're talking about. Applying for a graduate position, it's like applying for so many jobs. There are many more applicants than there are positions, and so it really helps when you have a personal connection. So here at Makerere, there are so many researchers, instructors, lecturers, professors who have degrees from around the world. So if you're interested in going to a university like Case or any other university, it'll help you if you can find somebody who studied there and who can introduce you to somebody, right? Somebody who can help you make a connection. You can go cold, and sometimes that'll work, but it's always an advantage if you can break through with a personal connection to get the attention. You'll still need to be evaluated and make a match, but sometimes you won't even be evaluated if you don't get some attention first. I think Rachel wants us to end and let you get tea. We're around, and you should please keep asking questions. But I hope we've clarified a little bit about how to apply for a PhD program in the US, and especially at Case Western Reserve University. All right.
Thank you so much, Professor Rollins. We shall have a networking, they're still around, Professor Satish, for any questions about Case Western University. But now we are overdue for a break. So let's get the break tea and be done by 11 to join the joint session. Thank you.